Okay, so to start creating our Streamlit UI, we need to import Streamlit as st, and we say from utils, we need to import generate podcast audio and create zip file. Then from our agent, we will need to import um Chrome. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start by adding the title and adding some text to our Streamlit UI. So we add st.title, and this is the podcast generator agent, and then we have an st.write, which says that, hey, this is different from the previous project. This was built using Spitch TTS and Crew AI. And then we have like another one liner that says create script approved scripts and generate podcast episode in a single click. So after this, the next thing that we want to do is to create a text area that would take a text input that would take the podcast topic from Streamlit. That was what we did. So we added a text input that enters that takes a text from the user, and we also added a button. So now I want to add logic. If the user did not um enter any topic, they cannot hit the button. Instead, tell them that they need to enter a topic for them to start the agent. So we can do the if here, and then we can add the logic here that says if not topic, um through an error message that says enter a topic to start the AI agent. But one thing I've noticed with building with Streamlit is that when you interact with buttons, sometimes it restarts your application. So we want to define session states in our Streamlit UI to avoid any potential bug, or when we want to download the script instead of it to download, we the whole application would restart and we would lose our information. So we can go up here and see session states variables, and session states variable data that we want to define final scripts, rejected scripts, audio bits, and audio generated. So these are the data that we want to keep track of in our projects. So now we say if the final script is not in the session state, um set that final script data to none. And if the script rejected is not in the session state, set that data to false. If the audio generated is not in the session state, set that to false. If the audio byte is not in the session state, set that to none. And this way we can easily keep track of our data in the session states. Then another thing that we also want to do, we also want to have a callback, an on-click callback for when we click on rejected scripts. So now this reject script function should handle that. And what it does is that this script rejected here, that it turned to false, with an on-click callback is going to turn that to true. And this would be used later on when we are handling the logic for the reject script button. So now that we have done this, the next thing would be to define the session states variables when the user clicks this start agent button. And we are now going to say if the user enters the topic and they click on start agent, the audio generated data and the script rejected data in the session state should be false, and the final script and the audio bytes should be false as well. This would essentially help us track the data in our Streamlit session. Okay, after this, the next thing that we want to do is to handle the flow of what happens when the user clicks on start agents button. And the first thing that we want to do is to like do a little spinner that says running agents, and we would be wrapping this in a try except. So we say for, I'm sorry, with st the spinner click show running agent. So when the user clicks start the agent, then this would show. But this is not the only thing that we want to do. We now want to kick off or kickstart the crew AI agents, and this should handle that. So what this does is that it's going to call the crew, which is the agent orchestrator that we had defined here, and it's going to call that, and we do dot kickoff. Now dot kickoff is the function name that kicks off the agent orchestration, and then we are now going to pass in the inputs that we got from the user, which is the topic. We now pass that to the AI agent. And once that is done, we now want to update our final script data that's we defined in our session state, and we would define it by using the raw version or the raw output of our crew AI, or our multi-agents AI. Now, once that's done, another thing that we want to do according to our architecture, we want to now display that final script for the user to see, go through, and either approve or reject the script. So we can easily just do st.subhead header. We can have a subheader and a text area, and the subheader should have generated podcast scripts, and the text area should have the final scripts that's we saved in our session data, and a height of 300. Now once that's done, we now want to wrap up this try except statement by saying if there was an error while running the agents, show this, like display the error. Now once we are done with this, once we can now take the topic, ensure that, once we can now take the topic, send the topic to the crew AI, get the final script, the next thing we want to do is to define the logic for the human in the loop part of our projects. Okay, and firstly, what we are going to do is we will check if the final script is in the session data, and if there is no script rejected, and if there is no audio bytes, then we can now let the user either approve or reject a script. So now for this, we want two buttons, the approve script and the reject script. Hence, we would have to define two columns. And in the first column, we want to have the approval script, and in the second column, we want to have the rejects scripts. Now, when the user clicks on the approval scripts, we want to now generate an audio. So when the user clicks on the approval script, we want to take that final script that we saved in our session data and send it to the generate podcast audio function that we had defined or created earlier. But then before it would start creating the podcast audio, we also want to have this little spinner thing that we did when the user clicked on starts the agent, but this time around it will be generating the podcast. So this is more like improving the UX of the projects, like telling the user that okay, I am not running the agent anymore. Right now what I'm doing is I am generating the podcast audio. And after the podcast audio has been generated, the audio generated data in the session states will now be turned to true, and the audio bytes will now be saved in the audio bytes data in the session state. Now the next thing that we'll do is to like throw an error if there was any issue or error while generating the podcast's audio. And now that we are done with the flow or what happens when the user clicks on the approve scripts, the next thing that we want to do is to work on the deny, sorry, not deny, the deny, the reject scripts rather. And in this place, this is where we would get to use this on click callback that we had defined earlier. Okay, so we start by saying that in the column 2, we want to have the reject scripts button. And not just that, we also want to have an on click action that says that, hey, if the user clicks this, we want to update the reject scripts data that we have existing on our session data, and we will turn that from false to true. And after the user has clicked this button, we also now want to give them a warning that says, hey, you have rejected the script. Ensure that you may need to just know that you may need to modify the topic, or you may need to run the agent again. So what we would do is that we would check the scripts rejected data in our session state, and if it's true, then we need to display this message. If it's not true, then there's no need to display this. So now that we have worked on what happens when the approve and the reject button is clicked on, the next thing that we want to do is to manage what happens when the user clicks on download button. And this is where we would be calling the create zip function that we created earlier. So we can go over here, ensure that we have called it up, that's on the top of our file, and then we can define the logic here. So before the user can get to download the zip file, we want to display the audio. So what we would do is we would first of all check that if the audio generated and if the audio byte is true, or if there's any data there in our session states, then we can display the generated audio. Let the user preview the audio, and then a success message saying that the podcast audio has been generated. Now when the user when we want to preview the audio, we are getting the audio bytes from the session state, and then of course it's in an mp3 format as well. Now once this has been previewed, the last thing that we want to work on is the download button. So we are going to wrap the download button logic in a try except, and what we are going to do is we're going to have a button with a label download all, and in brackets scripts.audio. You should tell the user that if you click on this button, you are downloading both the script and the audio. And we are now going to use the final scripts that we have in our session data, or the session state, and the audio bytes in said session state. We would pass that to the create zipped function, and we will use that to create the data for our download button. And then we would define the file name, which will be podcast episode.zip, and an MIME type. This is a file type, and since it's a zipped file, it will be application/zip. And then if there was any error while generating the zip file, um, we want to display it as an error message, say error generating zip file, and you want to now display the message. So this is how you can create your Streamlit app to handle not only the Crew AI orchestration, but also to handle the generation of the audio, and to manage the downloading of the zip file. So let's go ahead and test our projects.